How's it going, everybody? Welcome into Dark Souls 2. I want to take a quick moment before we get started to just thank everybody for watching that last video, Dark Souls 1. Up over, I think, 35,000 views as at the time of this recording, which is kind of honestly insane. That's way more views than I ever expected, so a big thank you to everybody who watched that one. Moving on to Dark Souls 2. This one's a bit different than Dark Souls 1, at least how I approached it. Did a lot more upfront research, and I'm going to walk you through kind of everything that I think makes this run tick, and then we'll go into bosses to see just how many we can one-shot. If you want to leave a comment before you watch this video to take a guess on how many bosses you think we can one-shot in the maximum New Game Plus cycle in Dark Souls 2, that'd be great. You know, comments are always great for the algorithm, so there's that. Anyway, on to the run. Club, the Grand Lance, Azel's Staff, the Blue Dagger, the Chime of Want, and the Dragon Chime. I have a little bit of information on the screen here. The Giant Warrior Club has got the highest physical attack of any weapon in the game when it comes to both the base attack and scaling. The Grand Lance has the highest counter damage of any thrusting weapon, which will be important in just a second when we take a look at rings. Azel's Staff, that is a DLC staff. It has the highest magic damage of any staff in the game, even outclassing the one that you can get in Brightstone Seldora. The Blue Dagger, which provides a passive 5% damage increase to both spells and hexes. From what I can tell, it does not work with pyromancies or miracles, although I did not do extensive testing. The Chime of Want, which has the highest dark damage of any chime if you infuse it with a Darkstone, and the Dragon Chime, which has the highest lightning damage when you infuse it with a Boltstone. Let's move on to some of the rings that we're using in this run. We have the Dark Clutch, Lightning Clutch, and Sorcery Clutch rings. The Flynn's Ring, the Red Tearstone Ring, a classic, Old Leo Ring, the Abyss Seal, the Sun Seal, and the Ring of Blades +2. So the first three clutch rings, they all provide an increase in dark, lightning, and magic damage respectively. It is a little bit different than some of the later games where it's just a flat percentage damage increase. The way that Dark Souls 2's damage works, it's just a little bit different, but it does work with ranged magic attacks. I'm not using the Fire Clutch ring because from what I could tell, none of the pyromancies really are able to match the damage that we're able to do with some of the other tools at our disposal. Flynn's Ring is very interesting in this game. It's very confusing if you've never used it before. What it does in Dark Souls 3 and some of the later variants is it goes off of either your percentage of the equip load that you're using or the actual total equip load that you're using. What it does here in Dark Souls 2 is it just looks at the equip load, and the closer you are to 60, you get a flat damage up, which I believe is up to +50, and that's why the stat spread is a little bit weird in this game, why I don't have 99 in endurance or vitality. I can't remember what it's called in Dark Souls 2. The Red Tearstone Ring, again, this is a classic. It's around a 1.2 damage multiplier to physical damage. Now, prior to calibration 1.10, as I understand it, this also applied to magic damage. That's why if you go look at some older videos where people try to one-shot bosses in Dark Souls 2 on just regular new game, they are able to do much more damage than some of the attacks that I was able to do in my run. But again, they changed that. I don't know if that was a mistake because in both Dark Souls and Dark Souls 3 it does affect magic damage, but for whatever reason in Dark Souls 2 in the last calibration it does not affect those. The Old Leo Ring, this is what I mentioned with the counter damage. So every weapon in this game has a counter value. It's that kind of reverse arrow on the stat screen. The Grand Lance has a counter multiplier of 160, which means that any hit that you do that applies counter damage does 160% of whatever damage you would have normally done. With the old Leo ring, you add an extra 12.5% on top of that, which can really make for some outstanding damage whenever you're using thrusting weapons. The Abyss Seal, that's the Abyssal Covenant reward, and the seal, it gives a 7.5% damage increase to all hexes at the cost of 30 HP per cast, which really that's not that much of a penalty. The Sun Seal, which does something very similar, it adds 5% damage to all miracles, but there is no downside to using it. And then the Ring of Blades +2, which adds a flat 50 physical attack rating to whatever weapon you are using. On over to magic, the sorceries, hexes, and whatnot that we're using: Climax, Resonant Weapon, Whisper of Despair, Unleash Magic, Soul Geyser, Crystal Magic Weapon, Sacred Oath, Sunlight Blade, and finally Sunlight Spear. Now, Climax is really the one that you're going to see the most of in this run. From what I can tell, I believe it's the highest single target damage spell, not just hex, spell in the entire game. There could be against various enemies, magic might be better, or even pyromancy or miracles might be better. But if you have an enemy with just the same amount of damage resistance across the board, Climax is your go-to hex. It does cost all of the souls that you have in your inventory to use it, so really you can only use it once per battle, or maybe if you have some souls on your quick bar, you can use it a couple times per fight, but it does require all of the souls, and it actually loses a lot of damage if you cast it whenever you're under 5,000 souls. Similarly, Resonant Weapon adds dark damage to whatever weapon. It also costs 5,000 souls to use. Actually, it might cost all of the souls. I didn't end up using it too much in this run, if at all, in any of my boss kills, but it is the highest elemental buff that you can apply in terms of magic between that Crystal Magic Weapon, Sunlight Spear, and whatever the fire one is called. Whisper of Despair, that does a flat -100 to whatever enemy's physical defense is. So if an enemy has 400, you just subtract 100, it goes down to 300. It's pretty good, but again, we're mostly going to be using magic, so it doesn't really come into effect too much. Unleash Magic, that gives you a 20% multiplier to all sorceries, miracles, hexes, and pyromancies at the cost of 30% of your HP for, I believe it's either 60 seconds or 120 seconds. Unfortunately, it does not stack with some things, such as, I guess Sacred Oath only does physical AR, but it's one of those body buffs, as I think people call them in Elden Ring nowadays. You can really only have one of those going at one time. That one we don't often use either, and I'll talk about that one in just a few moments. Soul Geyser, from what I could tell, is the highest damage sorcery. It fires 4 soul spears that do roughly the amount of Great Heavy Soul Arrow, I believe. The one downside is the tracking's not fantastic, so sometimes it tends to miss an enemy, especially if they are a lot smaller, they don't have a big hitbox. Crystal Magic Weapon adds magic damage to your weapon. It's the highest magic buff you can do from a spell perspective. However, what's interesting to note is that the aromatic ooze, the grease that you can put on your weapon, is actually stronger than Crystal Magic Weapon. The one interesting quirk with that is if you are holding a weapon in your left hand and you dual wield that, or two-hand it rather, you can't apply the aromatic ooze. So if you were to do two different buffs to your weapon, the one in your left hand would have to be Crystal Magic Weapon or one of these other blade, and then the one in your right hand would be the aromatic ooze or the pine resin, whatever it is. Sacred Oath gives just a flat plus 50 physical attack rating and gives you plus 75 physical defense. Sunlight Blade adds lightning damage to your weapon, and Sunlight Spear is the highest consistent damage miracle. And I say that because some of the AoE miracles that you can use can hit for more damage. It's just really hard to get them to work, and the only bosses that it really makes a difference on are ones with titanic hitboxes. So if you say use Heavenly Thunder, which throws an orb up in the air and shoots a bunch of smaller lightning spears down, in theory it could do more damage than a Sunlight Spear, but in practice I was unable to make it work, at least on a consistent level, and some of the damage that it was putting out didn't really stack up. So you'll see in this run I don't tend to use miracles too often. And then finally, let's move on to what I'm calling other. So that would be the Black Witch Domino Mask, the Engraved Gauntlets, Bright Bugs, and the Dragon Torso Stone. So the Black Witch Domino Mask also adds 2.5 or 3% damage to all magic that you use at the cost of 15% of your HP. It does stack with the Blue Dagger. However, it doesn't make an appearance too often because of the Dragon Torso Stone, which I'll get to in just a second. Same thing with the Engraved Gauntlets. So these things are very interesting, but sometimes they're a bit frustrating to use whenever you're trying to do a run like this, because you have a 1 in 20 chance to do 1.5 times damage to whatever enemy. I don't know if this does a calculation before or after some of the other damage is calculated, and what I mean by that is a lot of damage, especially when it comes to split damage in Dark Souls and other Souls games. What you'll do is you'll take, say, your physical damage and your elemental damage, you'll do your calculations separately onto those enemies' defenses, and then the damage is spit out, and say you do like 100 damage. What I'm not sure about is if it takes that number that it would spit out and multiplies it by 50%, or it takes your actual damage, being your physical AR and your elemental AR, multiplies them by 50%, and then does a damage calculation. I know it sounds like it would be the same result, but I'm pretty sure with the way that some of the resistances work, it does not. Either way, fantastic item. If you're using it in a regular run, that's obviously something you want to use, but it will really only make an appearance a couple of times in this video. And those are situations where I use the Dragon Torso Stone, and I think I'm able to get close to a one-shot using that, but I can't, so I try the Engraved Gauntlets combined with the Black Witch Domino Mask. And again, the reason we can't use those, as I'll skip over Bright Bug for a moment, is the Dragon Torso Stone grants you dragon armor, and it's very similar to Dark Souls 1. I think it's actually a little bit better in terms of defense, because it gives you a helm, gauntlets, leggings, and an armor set that provides decent enough resistance. But it obviously removes all of the other equipment that you're using, so you cannot stack it with the gauntlets or the mask. I couldn't find hard detail on the exact amount of damage that it adds whenever you do a roar. It seems like it's 15 to 20%, and it seems on the higher end, so I think it's probably 20% damage for that 5 to 6 second period after you roar. And then Bright Bugs, obviously, those are one of the unique features that Dark Souls 2 introduced, and then they never showed up again. It is basically like using Unleash Magic and Sacred Oath in one, but with all of the positives and none of the negatives. It gives you a 20% damage increase and a 20% damage reduction. It does not stack with Unleash Magic, but it does stack with Sacred Oath if a Bright Bug is used second. I don't know if that's a glitch in the system or not, but for the most part, it doesn't really matter too much in this run, because Sacred Oath does not make regular appearances, because again, we use magic far more often than we do. So yeah, let's get into it, starting off with the last giant. So I forgot one weapon that we are also using in this run to heavy effect, and that would be the Channeler's Trident, which if you do a two-handed strong attack, you do the little jig that the Channelers do from Dark Souls 1, and you get a nice boost to your attack power. It's 25% for melee attacks. I'm not sure if the actual quantity for sorceries or magic is known. I think it's around 15%, and it lasts for 15 seconds. I don't know why I forgot that, because I use it on every single boss fight, but that's the other weapon that you'll see used heavily. So it's a bit ironic, the last giant being our first boss, but this kind of shows the general strategy of what we do. We pop a bright bug, we use the Channeler's Trident to get that nice 15% bonus, and we walk in, use the Dragon Torso Stone, and then we hit them with the climax, and we do a very good amount of damage, over 5,000 in fact. But alas, it is not enough to one-shot. Could get an easy two-shot, as you see there. You could do even a little bit more damage if you got the gauntlets to proc. But next up was the Pursuer, and for the Pursuer I tried all three different types of magic, both sorceries, hexes, and miracles, as this was early on in my playthrough, just trying to get a general sense of the damage that we could do. And I was looking at some resistances and stuff, and the Pursuer has lower magic and lightning resistance than he does hexes, or dark rather, so I figured let's give it a shot. Fortunately it did not work exactly how I wanted it to, so that is another boss that we could not one-shot. Again, with the Dragon Rider, I am not doing the gravity, not really a glitch, but the exploit where he just falls off the arena. I wanted to see if we could actually do the damage to take him out in one hit, but him and the old Dragon Rider were also no-goes. Here at No Man's Wharf, and the Flexile Sentry was next, and it's one of the bosses in the game that has a couple of mobs that are added in the New Game Plus cycles. Both it and the Lost Sinner have that feature, although I don't think there's any other bosses. It's kind of interesting why it's just these two. As it is, they like to get in the way, so I had to try this one a couple of times, but unfortunately we could not get a one-shot yet again, and I was starting to lose a little bit of hope at this point. So the Belfry Gargoyles were next, and you'll see in this fight we get pretty close, but from what I can tell, I have about a sixth of their HP left, and I might be able to do it with an Engraved Gauntlets type run, but I had tried this like 10 different times, missing with Soul Geyser, trying some different soul arrows, Crystal Soul Spear, and I just decided that maybe it could be done, but I'm not going to be the one that is going to do it. So after the first 7 bosses, the last giant, the Pursuer, Dragon Rider, Old Dragon Slayer, Flexile Sentry, Rune Sentinels, and the Belfry Gargoyles, I was unable to one-shot any of them. You know, the Dragon Rider, you could use that cheese and you could say maybe that's a one-shot. I don't like to include that necessarily because I really want to be doing the damage as opposed to using the environmental features of the game in order to kill the enemy in one hit. Now the Belfry Gargoyles, we got pretty close. I know the HP bars in Dark Souls 2 are really tough to see at times, so I was able to do around 2/3 of the damage to one of them. So I think it might be possible to one-shot them if you get everything working in tandem. But I tried it a couple times, was not having much success, so I'm marking it as a no. I think there might be like a 5% possibility that you could one-shot each gargoyle, but really what you would probably have to do is, thanks to all of the staff, which I don't think I mentioned this, it also cuts your number of casts down. It cuts them in a quarter, so if you have 4 casts of a spell, it drops them down to 1. So if you're going to use those super high damaging spells, you would have to have like an amber herb or something else that restores your spell usage, and you would have to manage your weapon durability because that thing degrades incredibly quickly as well. And I just don't know that it's realistic to say that you could actually one-shot each individual enemy. Trying the Lost Sinner and the Executioner's Chariot, and again we do really good damage to both of them, but not nearly enough to even consider a one-shot. It only gets up to about a quarter on the Lost Sinner and about a fifth, maybe a sixth on the Executioner's Chariot. So here we have the Skeleton Lords, one of the couple of gank fights that are in the game, and this is where you see me first doing some melee builds, and reason being is you can really jack up your physical attack to pretty high levels, and skeletons in this and all FromSoft games have really low strike defense, which luckily our club does strike damage. So, there we see us stacking the buffs, and you'll see here when I run in, I'm using lightning damage because the arena is wet, so you get a little bit of bonus lightning damage. And we were able to take down the first lord, make some nifty little dodges onto that fireball, take down the second lord before he kills us, and luckily able to run all the way over to the third lord and take him out. And this is without doing any dragon or gauntlet strategies. So I did get killed by that skeleton there, but you can only get run down by bone wheels so many times, and I figured that is good enough to say that this is our first one shot of the run. Here is the Earthen Peak and Iron Keep with the Covetous Demon, Mytha, the Baneful Queen, Smelter Demon, and the Old Iron King. Obviously these bosses have pretty high health pools, so not too much to say about them. I'll just let the footage run, including a nice little quick kill of the Covetous Demon with some counter-attacking shenanigans. So this next set, I was very excited. We finally had our first one-shot of the run. Obviously the Lost Center, Executioner's Chariot, no-go, but the Skeleton Lords, again, you know, I only one-shot the actual lords themselves, and I didn't end up going through and killing all of the mini skeletons that spawn afterwards, but I think it's pretty clear that we would be able to. And then the rest of the ones that we fought, Covetous Demon, Smelter Demon, and the Old Iron King, not really close. I mean, again, we're doing quite a bit of damage to all of them, but the one-shots are just not coming. As we make our way down the gutter, we approach the Royal Rat Vanguard. And this is another one of these gank fights that we find in Dark Souls 2. This one's a little different than the Skeleton Lords, however, in that you have to kill a couple of rats before the actual boss will show up. And our first run with using a Dragon Torso Stone, we get ever so close. We do just about his full HP bar, 4,570 damage, and I knew that if I put on the Engraved Gauntlets and got lucky for that critical hit, we could indeed one-shot the Vanguard, and this one took me, I don't know, 25 tries, but we finally do get our crit. We do just about 5,100 damage, and there we have it. That is, if you don't consider the Skeleton Lords, this would definitely be our first true one-shot of the run, and boy howdy was I happy when that happened. Not a lot of bosses as we make our way down to the Rotten. It's really just the Vanguard and the Rotten, now that I think about it. This was kind of my test dummy for a lot of my damage setups at the start of the run, and clearly there's no way that we're going to be able to one-shot the Rotten, so I did a quick little no-hit counter damage run as well, just for fun, so sit back and enjoy that. There you go, from one of the 4 big bosses after a gank fight to another gank fight, and that is Prowling Magus and Congregation. This is the last of the base game gank fights, and it's oft criticized one thanks to kind of the weirdness of it. Hey, at least you get a Titanite slab, and luckily here we do find ourselves being able to one-hit every single enemy in the boss room, and I would consider that another successful one-shot. Again, this is a little bit different than like the 4 Kings in Dark Souls 1, where all of the enemies share the same boss pool, but you could kill each of the 4 Kings. Here, there's just one big boss pool, but you can't overkill enemies, so you have to take out the entire HP bar for every single enemy in the room. And if that's not a one-shot, I don't know what is. I suppose you could say that maybe if you got all the enemies lined up in a corner, and then use like a big pyromancy or a spell or something, then you might be able to actually kill every single enemy. I don't have the patience to do that, so I'm just going to consider this good, and that would be our 3rd one-shot of the run. As I'm doing this quick voiceover for the Dukes de Freya, I am realizing that I also forgot the Scorpioness Najka. I did try her a couple of times to no success, so here's just a quick fight against the big old spider. I got no real shot at taking down it in one hit, although we do pretty respectable damage, and I already have the graphics made at the time of this recording, and so the numbers that you'll see at the end of the video should add 1 more to the total number of bosses that we faced, as opposed to whatever I have on screen. It is what it is. We make our stop over to the Dragonlaic Castle to face off against the twin Dragon Riders, as I like to call them. And fun fact about these guys, the melee guy on the ground has way more HP than the archer guy sitting up in the corner. See here, one of my first attempts I threw that climax at the guy on the ground, doing a little bit more than 3,600 damage. But when I finally started targeting the guy sitting up on the top of the, we'll call it a stanchion, perhaps, we're doing significantly more damage. Again, it's still around the same number. In fact, I think it is the same number. We get really, really close to being able to one-shot him. And that 3653 If you take the same multiplier that we got between the Royal Rat Vanguard runs, you get 4,070 damage. I'm not 100% sure if that's enough to actually one-shot that guy. I think it is, but again, I'm not 100% sure. Looks like we need about an extra 15%, 12% damage. I think that we could, but I tried this fight like 50 times and I could never get the Engraved Gauntlet critical hit to proc, and I just gave up because I just didn't have the patience. So that one is a little bit sketchy, but I think that this one would be a one-shot if we could get the critical hit. We got a quick gauntlet of enemies with incredibly high HP pools, including the Looking Glass Knight, the Demon of Song, Velstadt, Vendrick, and the Guardian Dragon, and the Giant Lord. I'm just going to show those fights in rapid succession, as we don't really have a shot at one-shotting any of them. This is one of the last fights in the main game, the Throne Watcher and Throne Defender, and I knew that the Watcher had a pretty low HP pool, but in the attempts that I had, I was actually doing quite a bit less damage than I had initially expected. So unfortunately, at least in the base game, there are no more one-shots to be had, which leaves us with 3, maybe 3.5 if we could actually kill that Dragon Rider. So not as many as I would have liked, but if you can get more than one on the maximum New Game Plus cycle, I think that you could call that a pretty rousing success. So looking at the HP pools of all of the DLC bosses, there's really not a whole heck of a lot of reason to actually go through and do any of those fights, because it's pretty academic at that point. However, there was one fight that I thought we could possibly get a one-shot on, and that is the Afflicted Grave Robber, Ancient Soldier Varg, and Sarah the Old Explorer. and I'll just put up some footage here. Now it's important to note in the footage that I have a cheat engine function enabled, which is the auto parry, so that anytime the enemy tries to hit us, they get parried, if you will, automatically, as I just wanted to see as a proof of concept whether or not this would even be possible. So I've got everything set up, except when I was doing this, I didn't use Whisper of Despair. We do a ton of damage, as you see right here. A couple of the other enemies still takes a good 10 minutes, and I just didn't feel like fishing for a 5% chance to get a possible one-shot that I don't think would actually happen. So that's it for the bosses. Let's do a quick recap. So here we're taking a look at this next group, the Royal Rat Vanguard. Boy, that one took me so long to do. I want to say that took me about 20 tries. That was one of them where I knew I could do the one shot. I just had to do the engraved gauntlets strategy, you know, with alluring skulls and all that good stuff. That one was very annoying to do, but we got it, and I was very, very happy, because that one, you know, you could say the Skeleton Lords maybe not a one shot. I know their HP bar is a little different than, say, like the Four Kings from Dark Souls 1. I still consider it a one shot because the entire boss pool does not share one HP bar, or rather there's one HP bar and a ton of different enemies. So if you want to consider the Royal Rat Vanguard the actual first one-shot, you're more than welcome to do so. I won't, because I like to be generous. The Rotten, No-Go, Prowling Magus, and Congregation, again, very similar to the Skeleton Lords, and this one I did actually show that full one-shot, including a nice backstab in there. I was able to kill all those enemies in one hit. The Duke's Dear Freya, this actually did a lot more damage than I thought we were going to be able to, but no-go there. The Twin Dragon Riders, as I like to call them, I don't know if I came up with that name or not, but I'm 99% sure if you look at the damage between the Engraved Gauntlets run that I did with the Royal Rat Vanguard and some of the previous ones that I did, I included at least one of those with the Dragon Torso Stone. I think it's fair to say that you probably could one-shot that Archer guy in the Dragon Riders fight. I just did not, because you can only do that run so many times before you just decide, you know what, it's just not worth it. Let's just do the math and say that we're good. I want to say I did that at least 45 times, and I could not get the critical hit. So I just said, you know what, let's move on. And then the Looking Glass Knight and Demon of Song, no-go as well. And here we have the round out of all the boss fights that I actually showed, that I actually tried. These include kind of the last 6 that you fight: Velstadt, Vendrick, the Guardian Dragon, Giant Lord, Throne Watcher and Defender, and Nashandra. And then, of course, I showed that one weird fight with, like, what people like to call the Gang Squad in the Sunken King DLC. Again, I'm wary about calling that one. I'm gonna say possibly, but that run is hair-pullingly annoying as it begins, and actually going through the process of setting that up takes like 15 to 20 minutes each time, and I don't want to keep doing that just to try to get a 5% hit with those gauntlets, considering the number of times I did the Dragon Riders. So I said, you know what, we're not going to do this. I'm not going to count it, but if somebody wants to try it, you know, feel free, and if you want to send the footage around, great. Otherwise, I have a question mark, but I'm going to say that's an X. So obviously none of these bosses I was able to one-shot. I was thinking maybe the Throne Watcher Defender fight, I was going to be able to almost one-shot one of them, but we're only really able to do about 60%, so I don't think that one is possible either, so I'm just going to count it as a no. So all of the other bosses in-game I don't have footage for. The Royal Rat Authority, which I'll be honest, I just completely forgot about when I was making the videos, and when I was recording this, I was looking up the total number of bosses to make sure I had the correct amount, and I forgot about him. I did look up the HP of whatever he has in New Game, and I think it's around 6,000, so realistically that's not going to happen. We're not going to be able to one-shot him. The Ancient Dragon and Aldia should come as no surprise why, you know, I didn't even try those, just because the massive amounts of HP that they both have. The rest of them are DLC bosses from Elena down to the Burnt Ivory King, and then Dark Lurker, which for some reason I decided to list last on this list. I don't know why, but I did. That boss run is incredibly annoying. I don't think the Dark Lurker has too much HP compared to some of the other bosses, but I figured that with the typical build that we're using with Climax, it just wasn't really worth it, so I decided not to do it. So in total, depending on what you feel about the Dragon Rider and the couple of gank squad fights, I say that in terms of both the 3 in the Sunken King DLC as well as Prowling Mages Congregation and Skeleton Lords, we're able to one-shot 3 and we'll call it a half of the bosses in the entire game, that half being one half of the Dragon Riders fight, and then that possible 1/3 from that DLC. Out of 41 total bosses, I was really hoping for a couple of more. You know, the one that I did for Dark Souls, which again, I might go back one day and relook at that one after I do a couple more of these, you know, finish out some of the other Souls games, just to make sure I didn't miss any, because I'm pretty sure that I actually did. Either way, not nearly as many as we were able to do. I think there was 5 or 6 that I said that we could in Dark Souls 1, and again here, 3.5 is all that we were able to get. So still a success, you know, it's more than one. That's really kind of all that you can expect. And yeah, it was an interesting video to make. I will say that about halfway through, I was looking up some stuff and I realized that the melee strategies that I was using was actually probably less than some of the hexes that I was using, that I ended up using rather, in this video. And the reason why I started, or why I really was committed to doing melee, is because my test subject was the Rotten, who I don't even know why I didn't consider that he has a high dark resist. So whenever I was hitting him with a big old weapon and using a spell, I was doing less damage with that spell, and that's because he has a high dark resist. Anyway, that's all there is to this. So if you enjoyed this video, feel free to leave a like, a comment, or a subscription, and we will see you in Lothric for Dark Souls 3, which is my next target. See ya!